Okay, so it's not send request. It's not ready yet, or maybe it is. Okay, let me see. Yeah. Yes, I have it, and it's up. Great. Do you all see my screen, right? So thanks again. Thanks again, Nima, for asking me to speak about ICCAs. And I will speak about ICCAs, but I think there is something else that I really wanted to do today, which is to make sure that we all have a shared understanding of territories of life, which is quite fundamental to understand ICCAs and much else. I don't know if you can see the subtitle in my presentation, just a concept about territories of life, a label, or infinitely more. Well, I really do hope that at the end of this presentation, all of you can actually answer with lots of strength and pleasure this question. Now, let me go back long ago. 4.5 billion years ago. This is the age of Earth. This is when we think our planet was formed in the planetary space around our sun, our stars. 3 million years, much closer to us, is when the genus Homo emerges. The genus is the family of beings to which we, human beings, belong. So 3 million years. They were born in Africa, the paleontologists tell us, and by small groups of Homo, they spread throughout the planet. How did they survive? Well, they were foragers. Foragers is one word that means many things. Capacity to hunt, to fish, to gather products from nature, capacity to scavenge, which means to break the bones of dead animals to have the juicy and very nourishing material inside. And most of all, slow but surely, the capacity to learn, interact with diverse ecosystems, and evolve as diverse species. People say, biologists say that today we may have had 20 different species in the genus Homo. And today only one remains. It is the Homo sapiens species. About 1 million years ago, the genus Homo, so many different species, started controlling fire and making tools. Some people say primitive tools, but because they even managed to build rafts to move from one piece of land to another, to island or other larger land bases, they must have been quite ingenious, these people. And then about 60,000 years ago, our species, Homo sapiens, came out of Africa, met Homo neanderthalensis that came out of Africa much earlier. They probably, they surely interacted also sexually, because we all do have some parts of our genus coming from the Neanderthal, and they kept spreading throughout the planet and kept learning. Now, coming much closer to us, around 40,000 years ago, especially in areas inhabited by the Homo neanderthalensis, but also of all the other species, we find something that starts becoming extremely special. Some figurines, some clay figurines that look like human bodies, some petroglyphs that are in the stones, some images that have been carved, some paintings in the caves, huge, wonderful paintings, really they stop your breath when you look at them, and even beads and other evidences of creating symbols in the mind and then reproducing these symbols in so-called external reality. Then 12,000 years ago, more or less, we start seeing evidence of domesticated animal species and plant species around the world, which accompanied the pastoralism, the fact that the people went along with the animals that they slowly domesticated, shifting cultivation in horticulture. All this, while I'm telling you all this, because the relations between human communities and nature, especially in specific places and landscape where they moved, they show an evidence of multi-dimensional bonds that slowly, through all these thousands and thousands, millions of years, they have become more and more complex, richer. Now, what are these bonds made of? Obviously, they are made of the physical interaction between the people, the communities, and nature, but also of what we mention as mental, symbolic, spiritual interaction. And imagine all these foragers, pastoralists, horticulturalists, but also the shamans, the healers, the explorers, the leaders, developing knowledge and skills, what some anthropologists call metis, the skill that is in your hands that you cannot speak about, they cannot transform into word. It is the know-how that you have, and passing them on from one generation to the next generation for thousands of generations. Well, the bonds between communities and their environments are made of what we understand as culture. So it is the livelihood, the way in which we procure livelihoods through time. But as we said, is also the language, the symbolic understanding that we have within ourselves about nature and who we are and how we relate, the sense of common ancestors and history, the spirituality, the presences that are visible and invisible, and on that, the ways of organizing and behaving together. All this creates the diversity of ecosystem and matching cultures, which for me, but I think if you think about it, I think for many of you as well, is actually the wonder of this world, is the most wonderful thing that we have in the world today. Now, we can go much more in depth into this. We can look at what is inside those bones. You know, there is obviously a mix of several things. There are purposes for survival. You know, people need to find food, to find shelter, but there are also what we mentioned as symbolic meanings, like the knowledge and the spirituality. And let me think, one very interesting symbolic meaning that we hear a lot about today is conservation. We need to interact with nature in order to conserve it. But much more than that, survival purpose and symbolic meanings, but also plenty of emotions. You know, in the interaction with nature, we have all fears, spirituality, love, a sense of connection with our own past, with our own future. In a few words, the connection let people understand what is good, what is precious, what is just. And through those connections evolving, we figured out rules about how to behave with nature and with other people, and concepts that move from legitimacy to legality, solidarity, greed, and you name it. So when a human group has a sense of shared values, has capacity to develop rules and to make sure that these rules are respected, in one word, we say that it has a functioning governance institution. I hope you followed me up to now, because now we go into the terminology that we all need so much to understand and to utilize properly. So when the bond between a community and its environment is exceptionally strong, and the governance institution functions well, we speak of custodianship. Now, I'm talking directly to the translators of these webinars, because the translation of custodianship is particularly important and tricky, because it needs to be fitting the language, and it is very easily misunderstood. And the very fact that it is misunderstood and there is difficulty in expressing it makes understand, sorry, I had silly telephone, makes it difficult to understand the concept itself. So in French, we said some time ago the term garde, protection. Now, after some discussions among the members of the consortium, we speak in terms of soins collectifs au territoire. We speak in terms of communauté garante. In Spanish, the same discussion is actually happening now in these very weeks. So initially it was supposed to be custodia for custodianship, and possibly now some people may speak of cuidado colectivo al territorio or comunidades garantes. I don't know, but the important thing is that the term speaks to the people who use it. So in order to understand the better term, let's figure out what does it mean, custodianship. Well, this is the crucial thing. It means a collective, intergenerational, multidimensional bond between a custodian community and its territory of life. More interestingly, it is a relation that is filled with emotions. It is an affective relation that is experienced through time. It is filled with attention and care, and some people describe it as an umbilical cord connecting a community and its territory, something maternal, something related to love. Just yesterday, I received a marvelous paper by Hugo, whom all of you probably know. And Maela, please, can you eliminate your microphone? Thank you. Hugo has sent me this paper about a concept called muzzling, which is a word that describes the sound of a waterfall and also the sound of buzzing bees when they go to get the nectar. And it also describes the song that the indigenous Bunun people of Taiwan sing together when they go having a harvest. Now, these are the artistic expressions that are fundamental for culture and are fundamental for the relationship between a custodian community and territory of life. It is a relationship that brings meaning, that defines identity, that actually nourishes autonomy and the spirituality. And often it is mediated also by some substances by which people, leave the space of everyday and go to other dimensions where they understand what exists much, much better. If I have one way to understand the difference, to understand the sense of what we are talking about, is the difference between property and heritage. Property is something that is yours. You buy it, you sell it, you throw it away. It doesn't make much difference for you. Heritage is something that helps to define who you are. So you will never be able to sell it because it will be like you cut a piece of yourself. So territory is heritage, is not property. No matter what, you have a piece of paper that tells you it is your property, is much more than that. So, in fact, there is another thing that I like to say, that in custodianship, demonstrated through time into culture, gives origin to the very concept of territories of life. So only a custodian communities can define a territories of life, and only a territory of life sustains the life of a custodian communities. One cannot exist without the other. And that's the beauty of it. That's the richness of it that finds all this incredibly deep historical background that we all should keep in mind, even in this very fleeting and very stupid society in which we live today. Unfortunately, in the last 500, 600 years, increasingly, there has been a upcoming set of phenomena that go under the name of colonialism, neocolonialism, and even development, you know, like we all develop because we were not developed before. All this has created a clash between the territories of life and community custodians, and what I can only describe as the hubris, the arrogance of modernity, which brought about a tremendous loss of biological and cultural diversity and increased the gap between political and economic power within countries, but also among countries in the world. So, loss of biological diversity. Well, we hear a lot about it. Oh, we need conservation because we are losing biological diversity. And so countries have started dividing land into areas for sacrifice, industrial urban areas, and other areas for conservation. And by the way, these areas need to be run by professionals because they are the ones who are able to conserve biodiversity. Loss of cultural diversity. Well, this is much less cared about. No similar cry for the losing of the cultures. In fact, capitalists are very happy that the world is becoming homogenized, that everybody consumes the same stuff, and in fact that even nature is being commercialized, is being given economic value and little else. And then finally, these larger gaps in power that have created widespread violence and injustice throughout the world. They have created climate change, and they are now destroying the world through war, and especially also through militarization, the insane injection of so much in terms of resources for the military so-called preparation. What is hopeful here is that the bonds between the custodian communities and their environment, when they have deep historical roots and they merge with collective identities, they remain powerful. And in fact, I have to say that most of today's custodian communities are indigenous peoples, are those who have these deep roots and they have the sense of identity with the land. In fact, they are those who are struggle and they often pay the price of it, but they keep struggling for self-determination. Now, going back to the point of the fact that the world is divided into areas for conservation and areas for sacrifice. Governments have created institutions to manage conservation and professional institutions, and they call them protected areas. But there has been an increasing awareness that the traditional lifestyles maintained for the thousands of years that we talked about before, and especially in the last, let's say, 10,000, 2,000 years, by mobile communities, the pastoralists, the shifting cultivators that we talked about, and settled communities, like in Europe, the communities governing their commons. We call them conserved areas because they are conserved de facto, not because the government imposes on them, but because they have a healthy ecological outlook. Now, if you followed me so far, there is no surprise that the bond of community custodians is effective for conservation of nature. What is surprising is that it has barely been discovered now. It has been neglected for a long, long time, and only in the last 50 years, some policies and some organizations have started paying attention to that. And we must say that is also thanks to the work of the ICCA Consortium and its members that this has taken place. In fact, the consortium, it was born, as you know, in 2008, but predecessors of the consortium that are connected with it started in 1990s, and many are from members who became, from organizations who became members of the consortium. Now, the consortium understood the conservation by custodian communities is real. It is fundamental for nature. It is fundamental for people. But also, and very importantly, it understood that it is an excellent entry point for self-determination. It is a chance to conserve both biological and cultural diversity. And if you want to understand this, you have to do nothing else than going to check the Manifesto for Territories of Life of the consortium. Now, we started in the consortium by promoting the concept of ICCAs, which are territories and areas governed, managed, and conserved by indigenous peoples and local communities. This was done in the international arena, but also in specific countries. And you probably all know by heart, ICCAs, in order to explain it to professionals, were described as having three characteristics: strong connection between a community and a territory. The community has a well-functioning governance institution, so is able to develop decisions and enforce those decisions on the territory. And finally, these decisions, these rules maintain the territory in good conditions for nature, but also for the communities. Now, as I said, the definition of ICCA is schematic because it needed to be explained to professionals. But it is, if you really think of it, very much akin to this multi-dimensional, multi-generational bond that we discuss for territories of life and their custodians. And it had a merit, however, that since ICCAs were found all over the world, were discovered, oh, we have an ICCA. Well, governments started understanding that they have a good role for the conservation of nature, and they drew attention to a phenomenon, the phenomenon of territories of life, that was priorly neglected, misunderstood. So, all this, I hope, is clear, but let us remember that ICCAs is a label that we have placed upon the phenomenon of territories of life so that it becomes visible. There are many other labels that can be appropriate, including at the beginning, in fact, we didn't even much use ICCAs. We said, okay, they are protected areas of type D, meaning governed by indigenous peoples and local communities. Or in other situations, they are OECMs. And today, some people will say they are ITTs. There may be many, many, many appropriate labels, for like ICCAs, and many more can arise in the future. But labels, when they achieve some results, are great. However, what counts is the phenomenon, not the label alone. And I'm coming to my last slides. I would like to call your attention on the fact that IUCN motion on territories of life, no longer about ICCAs and all this stuff, has just been proposed. And the motions, yes, it says use all the labels you want, but consider highlighting the phenomenon itself, which is a fantastic phenomenon which is being attacked by all the forces that I mentioned before. And let me just stress a few novelties in the motion. And I think these novelties are very important for the work of Nima and her colleagues, because they should be somehow interiorized for the ICCA Consortium. First and foremost, labels, as I said, are great. And when you write them, you want to write in acronyms and you name it. But please, please, Let's have a human language instead of acronyms. Let's talk about territories of life. Let's talk about custodian communities. Let's stop using Bibuba and Tituta and all the other acronyms that are not immediately understandable for a variety of people, not just for us, engaged in policies. Then let's focus, and all this is in the motion, huh? Let's focus on what is the most important to define territories of life, which is the bond with their custodians. That bond is what is mostly at risk today. And that bond is embedded in language, is embedded in culture. And these languages and culture are what needs to be preserved and allowed to evolve naturally, not commanded and controlled from above. And so because of that, territories of life need to be self-identified, and they need to be mutually recognized among peers. And these are not to be recognized by governments or external experts. And in fact, it is important to have peer networks that need support in order to keep supporting the custodian bonds. Because of all I just said, the recognition of territories of life should be possible as protected areas, as ITT, as ICCAs, as OECM, you name it, but also in sui generis forms, the so-called third way that was discussed in COP16, because it is crucially important that it is the custodians who actually identify themselves as custodians of a territory of life, and they decide how to continue that. As part of all this, IUCN is asked to engage in a process of truth and reconciliation, because restorative justice is needed for the context of colonization, which has been going on for a long time and is still going on today. Gaza teaches us all about this and needs restorative justice. And finally, and very importantly, territories of life must be actively protected from the exploitation, the unsustainable exploitation that is verging upon them all today, together with the commercialization of nature and the financialization of everything. So this is my last slide. I think it's very, very important to sustain as many territories of life as possible today. And as many indigenous scholars have said, and many of them within the consortium, this needs to be done through endogenous self-strengthening, through what is called decolonization by Jeff Corntassel, or resurgence by our friend Hugo, or custodian self-determination. But it's also very important to have policies that recognize and support custodianship, and in general, the social and environmental justice that make it possible. And it is the combination of these two, self-strengthening and resurgence, and policies that support them, that we can maintain territories of life on our planet. So I would like to thank you very much for your attention. I hope I didn't go too long. If you want to know a little bit more about the thinking that went into very, very, very summarized in this presentation, there is a recent volume that the consortium has come out with, which is entitled Territories of Life, and it is in the process of being made available also in Spanish and French. You have here the link for the English version. Thank you so much, and I'll give you back the word.
Wow, yes. Thank you very much, Grazia, for that very powerful presentation that grounds us in the history on the concept of ICCAs, which you said has been a label placed upon the phenomenon of territories so that it becomes visible, and the call to focus not so much on these acronyms or labels, but to remember and emphasize on that custodian bond. Grazia's hand is raised. You may take the floor.
Thank you so much, Diana. and everybody who has spoken, just very, very powerful. Since there are not so many questions for the speakers, I like to ask myself a question to all the participants. And the question has to do with potential indicators for target 3. I've been thinking about what could be potential indicators for territories of life and their custodians. And I have 2 in mind. In a particular country, I've been thinking one could be how many communities have identified themselves as custodians of territories of life as part of any option. The first option that Albert and Joseph have been talking about, and all the others, but identified themselves as custodians. And the second indicator is how many self-organized peer support and review mechanisms do exist in the country and are active in peer recognition and support, in really what they are all about. So these 2 indicators, how many communities self-identify as custodians with all the various definition of the various languages, and how many peer support and review mechanisms do exist in the country. Would that make sense for you who are listening to this, this webinar? Thank you.